Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut this piece of wood in half, one piece for teacher, one piece for student, and we're going to mark a line across so that we can saw it. And we're not going to use a ruler, we're going to use what I call a copying stick. The first thing I'm going to do is guess halfway by putting a mark on this batten. Make sure that that's flush. I'm then going to put a mark there and then turn this round. Now you can't see this, but I'm now, well, let me move it round so you can see. And you can see that my guesswork wasn't that far off, because whoops, we land up with two lines. And then I'm going to use the combination square, which is like a tri-square, and just draw a line in between those two lines. Now when I use the tri-square or the combination square, I use my hand as a vice. So I've got my thumb here and my fingers there, and two fingers holding the blade down. So if we're using a tri-square, it's the same principle. Use your hand as a vice, thumb behind the stock, two fingers on the blade to hold it down, and then the remaining two fingers gripping it, and then draw your line. And then we put the face marks on. Now it's usually a P sign traditionally, but I just do a long line there, and that's the face side mark, that face side being the best side. And then this mark here is the face edge mark. And then we've got one more thing to do, which is to drop this line down, drop this line down on the edge, and we're going to saw this piece of wood in half to make two blocks for the first project. So now we're going to hold the wood in the workmate using the vice jaws. These are called dogs. And we're going to saw using a tenon saw. This is a low-cost saw. And we're going to guide the saw along the line. Now, a rule in woodwork is you always leave the line on, because if you take that line off, then you lose all your accuracy. So I'm going to do it on one side of the line, and I'm using my thumb to guide, and I'm drawing the saw back, and I'm going to put my foot on the workmate to steady it, and then I'm doing a gentle motion. Now, grip the saw with your forefinger pointing forward. That controls it, and get your eyesight over the back of the saw. Your actual eyes are both sides of the saw, and that will help you guide it vertically. It's a really nice wood, the jelly tong. It's used for model making prototypes. Now I'm concentrating on going down, so I only go down a few millimetres at a time, and then I look closely to see whether I'm sticking to that vertical line. So I'm now looking really close at that vertical line, keeping on path, and I'm going to ask my student to take over from here. So I'm moving it in position just to cut that last bit. And I don't want it to drop onto the floor, so I've got to really slow down here. So let's just move it to the middle there. Okay, so we're using a really low cost workmate. I think this one cost about £20, and I've beefed it up by putting diagonals so it's a bit more sturdy. Because when you're a beginner, you won't have the funds and you may not have the commitment to invest in a more expensive bench. So we're doing this entire project on a really low cost workmate. So we've got our block of wood. It's a piece of gelatong, which is a very soft hardwood, and we're going to prepare the timber to size. Now this is a procedure, and in fact you can buy timber such as this piece of batten that's already prepared or dressed, it's called. The surfaces have been planed. Okay, so I put the face mark on, but we haven't actually dressed or planed the first side yet. Because I was demonstrating using the combination square, which should always go against the face side or the face edge. So now we're going to prepare the timber to size, and that means getting all surfaces flat, and there are 6 surfaces. There are 2 sides, 2 edges and 2 ends, so they have to be flat. All opposite surfaces have to be parallel, and all adjacent surfaces have to be 90 degrees or square, as we call it, and the tool itself is called a square. So the first thing we're going to do is mount the wood on the workmate and plane the first surface. So I'm going to use these dogs. I mean, we could open up the vise. Let's try this. Ingenious little device, this workmate, designed by Colin Chapman, who is a designer of Lotus cars. Now that's one way of doing it, but the danger is when we apply pressure, it's going to slip. So we are going to use the plastic dogs. It's a rather short piece of timber because that was the only gelatong I could get in relatively short lengths, but it's okay, it'll be perfectly fine for this project. So now we're ready to use a smoothing plane to plane this flat. A longer version is called a jack plane, and it's basically, the job it does is, a short plane on a long piece of wood is like a tugboat trying to battle the waves on the ocean, whereas a long plane is like an oil tanker that just glides straight through. So this is a good size for a beginner. The problem with the traditional plane is it's pretty complicated. It's got a lot of moving parts that can be a bit difficult to get apart. We've got a blade that has this funny bent bit, and the idea of that is that when it goes into the wood, the shaving that comes out is broken up and goes into a coil or a curl. If you didn't have that, it would behave like an axe. It would just go straight in and get embedded deeper. So it's there for a reason, but it's quite difficult to set up. And oh dear, this one's rather rusty. I've been using it for outdoor work. So we're going to put this aside, and the big name in planes in Britain are Stanley and Record, and Stanley have come up with this wonderful simplified plane. There are only two moving parts. This is the cap iron, and then this is the blade itself. And of course you make sure that the angle bit is below, you don't put it the wrong way around. And these two little slots here allow for adjustment to make sure that the blade comes out parallel to the sole. That's the sole of the plane. So let's put this back in. I have actually set this up. The secret is to do as fine a cut as possible. Right, what I'm doing here is I'm holding the plane up with a light source on top but behind. So the blade, which is protruding very slightly, shows the shadow line. And I can adjust it with these two knurled knobs to make sure that the blade is parallel to the sole of the plane. So it's very slightly out. And of course, in order to do that, I've got to slacken off this nut slightly, but make sure I tighten it after I've tightened these. So it's a process of constant adjustment, but it's very important, and less is more. Always take a finer cut if possible. Now, you can see it taken off almost the dust there, but what I should really do is sharpen the blade first. So I'm going to take the blade out, move this to one side, move this, and I'm using a very low cost diamond sharpening stone, which you can use water to lubricate. Here's another one that's very similar, but this is really low cost. It's got a rubber backing, so hopefully that will hold. And then now what I'm going to do is sharpen the blade. It should really be, let's support that a bit better. That's it, that's steadied it. Now when you're sharpening the blade, whether it's a plain blade or a chisel blade, it's very important to lock the angle. Now I don't measure it, I guess it. It's about 35 degrees, and I'm left-handed, so I use one hand, my left hand, to grip it, and then the other one to apply the pressure. And I try and lock my wrists so that the action is from my elbows and my arms. Try not to do this, you'll get a curved surface. And then there'll be a burr on that, so we remove the burr by doing what's called backing off. And what we can do is use a piece of wood just to needs a bit more. If you hit a nail, which happens in woodworking, you'll need to regrind it on a grindstone, but for this general woodwork use, we just need to touch up the blade, sharpen it. And then back off. Right, let's try that. It does take a little bit of setting up. Put my foot on it to firm it up. You should be able to hear a nice zip. So I'm pressing down hard. It could still do with a bit more adjustments, so I'm going to go in very, very slightly. Too much now. Now sometimes it planes better one way than the other because wood fibres don't automatically run parallel to the surface of the wood. So experiment. Try it one way first, then the other way. If anything, that's a tiny bit on the coarse side. And then get rid of those shavings. Either blow them or tilt the plane, because otherwise they'll clog up in the mouth of the plane. Okay, so the action of the plane. In its journey across the wood, it starts off here. So it needs all the pressure on the knob. And then as you move it across, we balance, equalise the pressure. And then towards the end of the journey, there's more pressure on the handle. So once you start, be committed to the whole stroke. Try and go all the way through. And I slice the plane very slightly, like slicing bread. If you do it full on, you get too much resistance. But don't slice it too much, because then your wood won't be flat. And then move those shavings. And a guide is to draw some lines across the wood. So I put 3 lines across there, and then I'm going to number them. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Easy peasy. And then I'm going to use the plane in line with the centre of the plane, in line with number 1, and try and remove all number 1. It takes a bit of practice. Now my bench is wobbling around a little bit, and obviously if you can afford a more expensive bench, I mean the Black & Decker Workmate is more rigid than this. I mean this will do, but as I say, I want to make this accessible to beginners who may not have the budget to buy a whole load of equipment. It's doing the job. Taking number 4 off. I've got my plane set really fine, and there you are. Okay, well, I mean, just to demonstrate that obviously a proper purpose-built bench would be a lot easier, but as I say, you may not have that when you're a total beginner. You can hear a more solid sound. So I'm being really firm, and I'm standing like a boxer with one foot in front of the other. You know, don't plane like this. One foot in front of the other, get your body behind it and move your body in. And my arms are actually straight. So the level of the bench is really quite critical for you, the height of it. And when you finish planing, always put the plane on its side. Doesn't damage the blade. Okay, so with the preparation of timber, we make all the surfaces flat and smooth with the smoothing plane, which I've just done. And I'm now going to put on the face side mark because I've planed the first surface and I've made sure it's flat and level. So that is the traditional mark, but I just do that, a long one. So there are the face marks. The face edge is adjacent to the face side, and we use the square. In this case I'm using a combination square, and in fact this is already almost square, 90 degrees, but I'm still going to plane it to go through the process. So now I'm going to plane the face edge. And we can use the same marks that I use for the face side, guide marks. Doesn't matter that this bench is moving around slightly, but it sounds right. The zip of the plane. Look, I'm getting a bit of juddering on this, so I think it's because it's rather high in the bench. So I'm going to mount it a bit lower down, see whether I can get a little bit more control of the, make sure that these vice jaws are absolutely parallel. Move the dogs out of the way. And that's lower in the vice. Get rid of the shavings. And that's taken away some of the juddering. And now I can check, take it out of the vice and check. And if there are any high points, what I do is, if say it's like a hilltop there, I do that, and I try and leave those marks on and just concentrate on the middle bit. Take the bit off in the middle and then clean up either side. And there we are. That is our face edge. That's good enough. And for this beginner's first project, I don't expect it to be perfect. If you can see a bit of daylight on the square, don't worry too much. Just get it as accurate as you can. And there's the face edge mark. So now we've got two surfaces that are flat and square. Okay, so now I'm going to make the opposite edge to the face edge parallel, and to do that I'm using a marking gauge. Just out of interest, it's got 4 parts that begin in S: stem, stock, spur and screw. And those are the parts that we use. So I'm going to set it, the spike, just short. It's literally a millimetre in. Let's make it 2 millimetres in roughly, so that we've got a tiny bit to plane off. So the action of this is to keep the stock firm in against the face edge or the face side, but as we're doing the opposite edge, it's the face edge, and then we just go along. So the idea is to rest, to tilt it on this edge and trail the blade. You do not want to do it like that, it will judder. And make sure that this hand, I'm left-handed, so it's my left hand, is pushing in the stock. There's no need to actually look at the blade. You could just focus on the feel of the stock against the wood. Now I'm continuing to run the line along the edge, keeping the stock firm against the face edge, so it's always check where the face edge is, and then down the opposite side. Just trail the blade and go over it 2 or 3 times, and then the last edge. So just keep a firm hand, and I'm only going to have to plane off a minimal amount of wood, so that now is gauged to width, and I'm now going to plane that edge down to the lines. So now I'm going to gauge to thickness, and instead of using the marking gauge, I'm going to use the combination square, and I'm going to set the depth, as you can see, to just a couple of millimetre, a millimetre or so in, so that I'm not taking more off than necessary, and very carefully guide it with the stock held firmly against the face side, and then carefully press the tip of the ballpoint pen against the edge and slowly use it as a biro gauge. And this in a way is clearer to see than the marked line, and it's up to you to decide which is easier for you, whether to use a marking gauge or the combination square. And then we plane it down, setting the plane really fine, slicing the cut slightly, and just working back to the line. And so now we've completed 4 of the surfaces out of the 6, the sides and the edges. It leaves the end grain as the final surface to prepare to get flat. Now, if we plane end grain without supporting the fibres, they will split because they behave like drinking straws, and they will they'll separate out as you plane across them. So one way to prevent this happening is to plane a very slight bevel on one edge. That's a 45-degree angle. Okay, now that means that the very ends fibres are lower than the ones on the bulk of that surface, and they will support these fibres. So let's give it a try. Again, the plane is set really fine, and you know you should resharpen the plane maybe every 20 minutes, which I'm going to do in a minute. The fibres aren't being split because I've got that very tiny bevel. And so we plane that down till it's flat. Now another method is to make a wedge-shaped piece of wood that already has a bevel on it, and then that fits in the vise. As long as both surfaces are flush, it will do the job and support the fibres of the main piece of wood. So all that remains is to do exactly the same on the opposite end, to plane a very slight bevel first, very small, maybe 2mm, and then plane against that bevel. Make sure that the wood is firm in the vise. For some reason that's not parallel. Putting the wood low down in the vise.